What are some of the key benefits of field assignments for civil engineers, and how can this experience impact long-term career growth?
Yeah, so there's really just a lot of on the job, seeing the real construction progress that's happening. And long term, that allows you to be able to make better decisions as an engineer on your teams. So you can better understand how what I'm designing is going to be constructed. You can maybe even understand long term maintenance that would be required of whatever system or.
Field assignments are a critical component of a civil engineer's growth and development. They offer a unique chance to apply technical knowledge in real-world environments, working directly on active projects and overcoming complex challenges. This hands-on experience is key to building the practical skills and confidence needed to thrive in the profession. In this episode, I'm excited to welcome back Mariah Schroeder, PE, Senior Civil Engineer at Burns McDonnell. Mariah previously joined us on the Women in Engineering podcast, where she talked about communication dynamics in STEM and mentorship. And today she's here to share why field assignments are such a valuable part of civil engineering. From gaining practical experience to improving design coordination and working closely with contractors, she'll cover how fieldwork can help you build a stronger, more successful career. I'm your host, James Taylor, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast. It's now time for our civil engineering conversation of the week with Mariah Schroeder, PE. Mariah, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, James.
Can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself, what led you to focus on civil engineering and pursuing fieldwork opportunities in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Michigan City, Indiana, and I always was interested in math and science and giving back to the environment and kind of the environmental and water space. I attended Purdue University and received a bachelor's in civil engineering with a focus on hydraulics and hydrology. And then I did stay and pursue my master's degree. And that was more focused on water and wastewater treatment, along with some hydraulics and hydrology as well. What I really like about civil is that you can see the progress that's happening, either with a design project or with a construction project, and especially when you're in the field. So I started at Burns McDonnell in 2016 after a couple internships with them. I worked in the water space for the first 9 years of my career, working on larger infrastructure projects, plant projects. And there was a field opportunity that came up to work on the Wichita Northwest Water Facility project. And just like I love seeing that progress happen on those projects. And so I definitely wanted to get involved in field work.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but what can you talk a little bit about what does a typical day look like for you when you're working as a field engineer on a construction project?
So when you're on a field assignment, you're living remote. So you're coming in from your apartment or your hotel to a construction trailer or a connex, or maybe your client has a building that you sit in. You might be on your computer for some of the day, out in the field for the rest of the day. You might be using a total station for taking some survey measurements. You might be talking with contractors and kind of facilitating their work, resolving any questions or issues that are going on. And there's also the paperwork piece of it. So you spend some time in the office working on reviewing submittals or responding to RFIs, requests for information, maybe even some engineering change notices. And then you get to travel back home. In my case, it was once per month. That was the policy for our field assignment.
So when you're talking about field assignment, you're actually talking about being there on the job almost all the time.
Yep.
Like you said, you're kind of relocating during that time period. You mentioned your situation was you were able to go back home once a month. How difficult does that end up being with, hey, my home's here. I'm actually resident here for this period of time. How difficult was that for you?
So just uh, in the first few months of the field assignment, it was still pretty exciting and you're traveling back and forth. But I was on this particular field assignment for over 2 years. So after a while, it gets to be a bit lonely and having to maintain two residents essentially. So I have a home in Kansas City. And then for the duration of the field assignment, I rented an apartment in Wichita, Kansas. And so the travel back and forth was a bit difficult. So you always want to consider the benefits of the field assignment. So in my case, those are per diem, so a payment per day for your travel and expenses so that you didn't have to submit, oh, I went to Subway for lunch this day and I went to dinner at this restaurant this day. So it's all just a lump sum payment per day. And so you really need to consider that and what your travel benefits might be in your field assignment. So maybe it's you get to travel home every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks. And then you need to consider your loved ones and your pets as well. I know this was a big one
Yeah.
for some of our engineers that had an opportunity to come out to the job site. They have a cat or a dog, and so having to find temporary housing that can accommodate, a spouse or a partner or a pet is also kind of a factor in there.
What do you talk a little bit about, hey, per diem and those types of things, but what are some of the key benefits of field assignments for civil engineers, and how can this experience impact long-term career growth?
Yeah, so there's really just a lot of on the job, seeing the real construction progress that's happening. And long term, that allows you to be able to make better decisions as an engineer on your teams. So you can better understand how what I'm designing is going to be constructed. You can maybe even understand long term maintenance that would be required of whatever system or process that you're putting in. And so you really understand what's important, what needs to be shown on the drawings. Like, what does the contractor in the field need to see on those drawings? And we were just talking about this actually for a project I'm working on right now. And for Valley Center, Kansas, we're building them a new drinking water treatment plant. And we were talking about in our design team meeting, how can you review submittals with safety in mind? And my lead process engineer, Andrew, he said that he really thinks about accessibility around the equipment when he's reviewing his submittals. He thinks about accessibility in terms of long term maintenance. Because if something is oriented strangely or it's tight to the wall, you can almost assume that it's never going to be maintained. And
Right. Right. Exactly.
and
Yeah.
so then you're just pushing a safety issue down the line for your client to handle because it hasn't received adequate maintenance due to how we laid it out in the design. So those
Yeah.
types of things, the field assignment really helps you like focus in on what's important.
It's a great point because a lot of times as engineers we think about the design aspect about, okay, how do I take my knowledge I learned from school, how do I apply it to the local regulations, how do I design something, but if you don't take those end results into mind, what that, one, what the construction looks like, but also what the long-term maintenance is, you're kind of
Yep.
missing the life cycle of the project where
The
you
whole
know
project.
Exactly. You're only looking at your piece kind of with blinders on and saying, "Yeah, it can be built, but is it the best possible solution for things?" And I think that's, kind of what you were sharing there of like being out in the field, you're actually able to see not just, you know, how it was designed, but actually how it was implemented during construction.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. You got to look at the whole picture and how it's going to benefit your client long term.
Now, you were talking about this 2-year project that you were on, the Wichita Northwest Water Facility project. Can you share a little bit more about your role in it and some of the challenges, the biggest challenge actually that you encountered while working on such a large scale project? I think it was around a $500 million water facility.
That's right. Yes. So it was a mega project. I was really excited to have this field assignment. And I was out on site for more than 2 years. So the Northwest Water Facility in Wichita was the largest infrastructure project that the city had ever undertaken. And it'll provide water for about 20% of all Kansans. So 1 in 6 will get their water from this facility. And one of the reasons why I really like working in the water space is that it impacts the entire region. It impacts health, the economy, the vibrancy of the area to provide that safe and reliable drinking water.
Right.
And the city really was forward thinking. They obtained the property a long time ago. They had done quite a few planning efforts to make sure that they were putting the best solution forward. And they ultimately made the decision to replace their 80-year-old existing facility with this Northwest facility. It's 120 million gallons per day. MGD is how we abbreviate that, and the size is just huge. So the filter building is as big as like several football fields. It's the largest structure on the entire site. The entire upper observation deck, you could actually throw a football up there. There's a lot of space up
Wow.
there. But
Wow.
the clarifiers are very large, one of the country's largest installations. The inner diameter is 141 foot. And then we also have pipes that are up to 96 inches in diameter. So this is a
96.
96. That's
Wow.
correct. So I'm
Wow.
5'9", so I'd fit right in the
Yeah,
center,
right inside.
probably
Yeah,
with my arms
wow.
up.
Wow, that's a
um,
pretty big facility.
it's a huge facility. And so my role as the kind of lead process field engineer was to work with the design team before I headed out to site. And then on site, I was responsible for coordinating with several contractors that were installing that process equipment. So anything that involves treatment, all of that equipment, piping and valves. And I was really heavily involved in commissioning and startup planning. So we have to think about, once we get it installed and we start flowing water through it, how are we going to validate that each individual system operates appropriately? Because there's a lot of controls, instrumentation and controls that happens. It's not a manual process by any
Right.
means. There's quite a bit of decision making and manual choices that are made by the licensed operator. But the plant also has a lot of technical safeguards, alarms that go off. If the water level gets too low, it'll automatically turn off the pump because the pump will burn itself out if it's not exposed to water. Those types of things, try to build in those safeguards. And so you have to test out to make sure everything works. So a lot of my responsibility was also going through that commissioning planning phase, and trying to make sure that we were ready to go for that phase of the project.
Now, did you mention that you were involved during the design as well?
Yes. So I was involved for my KC office for about 6 months before I went out on the field assignment.
Awesome.
And that really helped me understand, because just the massive size of the project. We have over 1,000 drawings for this facility. So trying to understand how it's organized, who's responsible for what pieces, who to go to if there's a question, who's the ultimate decision maker, and just wrapping my mind around the entire facility in general.
Yeah.
Those 6 months are really crucial
Right. Yeah, no,
before I went out on
absolutely.
site. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered during the
Yeah.
project?
So for me personally, the I had never been on a single project at one time. So I always was balancing 6 or 7 smaller projects
Sure.
and working on different phases. And I had never done a single project at one time. And I was out there for more than 2 years and working on the design beforehand, so it adds up. So personally for me, I discovered that I really need that variety in different projects at one time, kind of balancing that, because a lot of the times you find an issue when you're balancing those multiple projects. You can kind of shelve that issue for a few hours or a couple days, and then you can come back to it. And when you're on one project and you're responsible for solving the issue right now, it gets a bit overwhelming. For me personally,
Yeah.
it may work well for some people, but it wasn't my favorite thing. And then the other challenge that we had, just technically, is with the commissioning planning, trying to obtain enough water to run through the plant to test it. So Kansas has been experiencing a drought. They also still need to serve all of their customers with safe, reliable drinking water. And so, in order to test this facility, we really had to get creative with how we arrange the different tests, what pieces of the plant are we testing at certain times, and how much water, what the limitations were on the
Yeah.
supply water for the testing period.
Yeah, it's something that you probably don't think about as you're going through it of like, okay, at some point we actually need to put this online and test to make sure that everything's good. But we
Exactly.
can't take the current customers off of water to do that. So how much
Yep.
like
Oh, we have 4 months of testing. No,
yeah,
everybody turn off their taps. Yeah, that
exactly.
doesn't
So
quite work.
so how did you like what was the thought process in like trying to figure out how to overcome that, and then what was the solution related to that?
Yeah, so the city has been a great partner throughout the whole project, and so they were really on board with getting creative with how we could accomplish it. So, we ultimately decided to take one of their supply lines and make it part of a loop
Okay.
around the new facility, the new Northwest facility. And so that limited the amount of supply that they could treat at their existing plant and send out. But we felt it was valuable for testing out hydraulics and controls at the new plant and getting that check mark. And then they also were willing to, so the plant is rated for 120 million gallons per day, but certain trains can be tested singularly. So one or two clarifiers, and then a few of the filters, and then one of the chlorine contact basins, and you get the full effect of
Right.
120 mgd. So we basically have created different tests that I think the lowest flow amount is 30 mgd for an entire train. And so we're able to test out all the components of the plant with the restrictions on
That's great.
water.
Yeah. Find the problem, find the solution. Have the problem, find the solution. Basically, where
Exactly.
yeah, that's great. How has field experience shaped your approach to design at this point? Because that project's done. I'm guessing going more back into design and working on those multiple projects like you talked about. How has that shaped your approach and also improved collaboration with both the contractors and design teams on complex civil projects?
So I think it just reinforces that communication is so, so important to finding a solution to anything.
Yeah,
So, y- you know, you can have the best idea, but if you're not able to communicate it in a way that the contractor is receptive to, that it's just a wasted idea. So,
yeah,
so really building those relationships was really key. And I really design with kind of that constructability in mind, with that final installed product in mind, with that commissioning process in mind. How is this going to get tested out? Maybe we want to have a secondary valve here to be able to isolate during commissioning. So that all of those pieces, I now have kind of that valuable experience that can
yeah.
inform my design.
Well, and it's one of those things where, right, if you're not designing to with constructability in mind, are you really doing the best job that you can do as an engineer, right?
Right,
And it's not saying that you're negligent. It's just saying like if you don't have that field experience, you don't have that construction aspect associated with it. Are you are you understanding how things are being built versus just being put on the paper as a designer?
right.
I think all of those pieces together make you a great engineer and make you a well-rounded engineer so that you're able to not just design and put something on paper, get it permitted, but also make sure that moving in construction it actually can be built and solve the client's problems.
Exactly. You want to provide that value to the client.
So you talked a little bit about hey, you had to have two houses and some other things like that. The field assignments often involve a lot of coordination. What are some of the logistical things that are involved in managing a field assignment from both a personal level but also a project perspective?
So you would need to consider, if you take a field assignment, you probably would not be working on any further design work or opportunities from your home office, your home work office. So you kind of have to weigh that. You have to consider how you're going to transition off your current assignments. So you might be on a few projects and you have to transition your responsibilities to someone else on your team to be able to go on the field assignment. And to me, that's really your responsibility. You could
Yeah.
probably make the case that it's your manager's responsibility, but you should be owning that and making sure that your current responsibilities are taken care of. And then on the flip side, when you come back to the office, how are you going to get integrated back into the group that you've left for a period of time? So you need to be thinking about that. And then as far as like living situation, I kind of mentioned like loved ones and pets. That's a big deal when looking for a spot to live. And then also, furniture. So are you going to look for a place that's furnished? Are you going to buy your own furniture or bring your own furniture? A lot of people rent an apartment and furnish it themselves. Some people do like an extended stay hotel. Um, I think that would drive me crazy to be an extended stay hotel
Yeah.
and to not have like my
Little
own stuff.
right. Yeah. Little cooped up there for sure.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I mean, like they'll have a cleaning service and all of the furniture is there. So you just kind of have to weigh
Yeah.
what you need and to manage those two living situations. And then thinking about your home base, your home or your apartment back where you live, where your main working location is, are you going to need to have yard maintenance scheduled? Are you going to need to have uh, cleaning services come in and maintain your existing home while you're gone, or is someone going to be living there while you're gone?
Yeah.
So all those things need to be considered along with the compensation, right? The compensation is just a
A
small
small piece of it,
small
yeah.
piece of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone's listening to this conversation saying, "Hey, that sounds pretty interesting. I want to look into doing a field assignment as an engineer." What are some of those steps that they can take to position themselves for these opportunities when they come up? And what qualities do you think make someone a good fit for this type of work?
Yeah. So I would say you should be focused on learning as much as you can in your technical specialty because you're going to be able to provide the most value and also get out of it what the most you can when you go on a field assignment. You should definitely also make it clear to your supervisor or project managers, however your work is organized, that you're interested in seeing all phases of the projects that you're working on, including field work. So make sure that that's very clearly communicated. And at my company at Burns McDonnell, there's actually like an internal interest form that you fill out for and they typically will look at those when they have field assignment opportunities. And then if it's a longer opportunity on a larger project, they may have like an email that goes out to specific individuals saying, "Would you consider? Here's a short application," those types of things. So always be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
And then as far as skills, I would say communication is really the top one for me. You're going to be working with difficult people, period, that are used to, "This is how I do it. This is how I've always done it. Why won't you let me do it this way?" So being open in your communication, being clear in your communication, um, also being humble and understanding that you don't know everything and
Yeah.
you're really like open to learning from those on site. I've worked with a superintendent at CAS Constructors on a few projects, and Wichita was one of them. And he knows if I don't know, the first thing I'm going to say is, I have no idea. I will look into it. I will call X and Y. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts to share? And then being willing to listen and take that in and be able to coordinate with the contractor. It's really important.
It's an interesting point because I think as engineers, sometimes we can present ourselves to be the smartest people in the room,
Yeah.
and especially as maybe a younger engineer that might be wanting to get into this field experience, understanding and realizing that it's okay to not know everything. It's definitely a vulnerability inside of us to be able to admit that, hey, I don't know that, but it's a key piece because lying that you do doesn't get you anywhere, right?
Nope.
It impacts the project. It
You just dig a
messes.
hole.
Exactly. It affects everything that you're doing. And so,
Yeah.
being true, honest, with what you're doing with your communication. And when you don't know, there's probably someone that does know at your
Yeah.
company. You just got to find out who that person is and talk it through them. So that's a great point. I love what you said there about being humble and not being the one that knows everything. You're there
And
to learn.
And the other thing, so this Wichita project was delivered in a progressive design build model. And so Burns McDonnell was teamed with Alberici Constructors. And so going back to what you said about, don't fake it. Like you have to maintain that trust between the two companies that form the joint venture. Those two companies, like we have to work as a team. We have to trust each other to be able to move forward in the project.
What are some common misconceptions engineers might have about working in the field, and what do you wish more people understood about that role?
Yeah, I think maybe some common misconceptions is that you're always outside, like you're always in the field. And there's definitely some components of office work. There's always going to be that paperwork piece. It may not be the office that you're used to. It may be a card table in a room that has active construction, but you
Yeah.
can make it work, right? And then maybe another misconception is that you're alone. You're alone and you are kind of leading it on your own. Like you're kind of a separate entity that's not intertwined with the project as a whole. And that has not been my experience at all. There's a lot of support if you're willing to accept it, right? um,
Yeah, right.
for
Exactly.
for providing value in that field engineer role.
So, what final piece of advice would you give to civil engineers considering their first field assignment, particularly when weighing the long term impact on their growth and opportunities?
It really may seem overwhelming, but if you can swing it personally, you should definitely take advantage of any field assignment that comes your way. If you do, you'll really be well positioned to lead future design efforts and maybe even bleed into the construction market as well. You'll have those skills developed if you use your time wisely while you're in the field.
There you go. She said it. Just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. That's what it sounds like. So, thanks for sharing all of that today, and really gained a lot of information related to it. So appreciate what you had to share.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, now it's time for our CE Hot Seat segment of the week with Mariah Schroeder, PE. Mariah, are you ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. Do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, do you have a specific morning ritual, lunchtime ritual, things that you do on a daily basis that contribute to you being a successful professional?
I always schedule a walk. And now that the weather's nice, I've been walking outside. So during my lunch hour, I'll take a walk around our building here at Burns McDonnell. Or in the afternoon, if I have a lunch meeting, I'll take a walk inside. I also have a reminder to leave work that happens on my calendar at 5 p.m. every day. Most days I go right to the gym, and that's really important for me to maintain my health and in multiple ways, my physical health, my mental health, so that I can bring my best self to work.
What is one book that you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you found to be extremely helpful in your professional and or personal development?
So, a book recommendation that I have, it's called Finish by John Acuff. And it really, dives into how you can be more flexible in accomplishing your goals. And sometimes we hold ourselves back from meeting a goal, or we set a goal that's so unattainable, we'll never reach it, and then we become discouraged. And so he uses an example of, I set a goal for I want to read 30 books this year, but 10 of those that I read this year were audiobooks, so those don't really count. And that was just a mind-blowing moment for me where I was like, "Yeah, why wouldn't they count? They should count." So that's a book that I'd highly recommend.
Like, I'm gonna have to add that to my list.
Yeah.
Thinking back on your managers of the past, picture your favorite manager or managers. What was it that made them your favorite?
So we have quite a few very talented project managers here at Burns and McDonnell. And what I really appreciate about them is their technical expertise. So they really have experienced, gone through the design engineer role, the field engineer role, and have a firm understanding of how the overall project is delivered. And so they're really invested in the project success. They understand all the pieces. And of course, my very favorite ones are invested in the staff, right? They're invested in
Right.
you as the project moves along.
I've got one final question, and that is the critical civil engineering career elevator advice question. It's a tongue twister. But if you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student and had about 30 to 40 seconds with them, what career advice would you share with them?
So civil engineering is very broad, and you have a lot of opportunities to explore different industries, different phases of project delivery, and you should really explore those to see where you get the most fulfillment. And then you focus on that. You focus on developing your leadership skills and your technical skills in that area.
Mariah, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can our listeners connect with you?
So I am active on LinkedIn and would be happy to chat with any of you more about field assignments or anything else.
Awesome, Maria. Thank you so much. Mariah, sorry, Mariah.
That's okay.
Appreciate your time today and looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you.
Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at civilengineeringpodcast.com. There you'll find the summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your civil engineering endeavors.